Welcome to Code Rage X. My name is Brian Alexakis. I'm a product marketing manager here at Embarcadero. I'd like to kick off today by quickly going over the latest and greatest from C++ Builder 10 Seattle. Then I will turn the presentation over to David I, Vice President of Developer Relations, who will show you some great C++ demos. The blog post for this presentation is live at embt.co/crx-cpp-address. This blog post is filled with tons of great links and learning resources for C++ 10 Seattle, so be sure to check that out. C++ Builder has come a long way in the last several years to support building apps that run on desktop, server, mobile, cloud, and even the gadgets and devices of the Internet of Things. C++ is an industry lead in rapidly building Windows apps using either the VCL or FireMonkey framework to build multi-platform apps that deploy to Android, iOS, OS X, and Windows, all with a single C++ code base that is shared across all these applications and platforms. With C++ Builder 10 Seattle and the rapid application developer approach, you will deliver applications up to 5 times faster than before. With C++ Builder 10 Seattle, now is the time to ride the Windows 10 release wave. C++ Builder 10 Seattle is focused on delivering developers a clear path to Windows 10. After the lackluster adoption rates of Windows 8, Microsoft set out to make the release of Windows 10 the biggest launch of Windows to date, and so far they have accomplished that. Despite slowing adoption rates over the past month, out of the gate, Windows 10 has outpaced the adoption rates of Windows 7. Within the first 4 weeks alone, over 75 million PCs have adopted Windows 10. This adoption rate does not just apply for consumer-facing applications, but also stands to have a big enterprise and business impact. Surveys on business adoptions of Windows 10 are in agreement that there will be a much bigger adoption rate of Windows 10 over Windows 8, and over time, even more so than Windows 7. For these reasons, it has been a top priority that C++ 10 Seattle give developers a clear path so that you can all ride the Windows 10 wave. However, needing the ability to still support the mobile market is still a very critical topic for many developers. In the second quarter of 2015 alone, over 1 billion smartphones were sold, totals over 1 billion devices in a year. It is estimated that there are currently over 2.5 billion mobile devices in use today. Android and iOS together run on 95% of all these devices. With C++ Builder 10 Seattle, developers have a complete solution to target both desktop and mobile platforms, whether it be Windows 10, OS X, iOS, or Android. C++ Builder 10 Seattle is ready for the Internet of Things. IoT has shown tremendous growth in the past year with an absolute flood of new gadgets and devices that are packed with all kinds of sensors, feeding a new wave of big data over the net. These devices are available at an incredibly low cost, which makes rolling out real-world solutions very doable from small to large scale. The IoT has a transformational effect on how business is done: retail, marketing, industrial, entertainment, healthcare. Throughout Code Rage, we will be showcasing a lot of technologies, development practices that will be very important in implementing IoT solutions. We're going to show some of those later in this presentation. C++ Builder is the compiler of the future and behaves like a modern compiler should, smooth and fast. I'd like to take a quick second to highlight some upcoming C++ Code Rage X Windows 10 and IoT tracks. First up, update your app UI UX with the all-new Windows 10 look and feel. That is today at 9 a.m. PDT. And if you want to dive into some IoT topics, we have a deep dive on beacons and Bluetooth LE connectivity with the R&D team. That's tomorrow, Wednesday, October the 14th at 7 a.m. PDT. C++ Builder 10 Seattle has received a big update for Windows and mobile. In fact, it's one of the most significant releases in years. New C++ 11 language features are now supported in the Win32 compiler. This brand new Win32 compiler is enhanced with the Clang toolchain. This supports the RAD product method event model and rich RTTI. And this new compiler also supports Arc for mobile. New C++ language feature support for Win32 includes auto, null pointer, smart pointers, lambdas, move semantics, range-based for loops, override and final, strongly typed enumerations, non-member begin and end, static assert and type traits. C++ Builder 10 Seattle is data-rich and hyper-connected. FireDAC gives direct support for Oracle and Standard Enterprise, Workgroup, Cloud, Desktop, Embedded, and multi-tiered databases. FireDAC is the foundation of C++ Builder's data-rich access. And FireDAC now supports NoSQL with a MongoDB mapping layer. Hyperconnectivity occurs over Internet protocols, HTTP, HTTPS, Wi-Fi connectivity, Bluetooth and Bluetooth LE or Bluetooth Smart connectivity through the cloud, over backend as a service, and also including custom multi-tier architectures, and that's just to list a few. There is much more FireDAC information, which again, if you can dive into by checking out the blog. C++ Builder 10 Seattle has incredible Windows 10 support. It's a huge enhancement to the VCL. Developers can easily build new Windows 10 user experience into their apps using the VCL. Windows 10 Styles makes it easy to take your existing app and give it the look and feel of Windows 10. And further, developers can take those existing apps and hook them into the universal Windows platform services and components, like notifications and contracts. This really makes migration to Windows 10 a snap, thanks to C++ Builder 10 Seattle and the improved VCL framework. The C++ Builder 10 Seattle IDE has been re-architectured and now has access to 4 gigabytes of memory. This allows developers to build projects that are 3 to 4 times bigger than what was previously possible, including support for projects with millions of lines of code. Great new productivity features have also been added. For example, the Object Inspector is now filterable, which is a small change that provides developers with a huge boost to their productivity and workflow. Other enhancements include multi-paste support, an auto-save feature which helps prevent code loss. And there are many other enhancements added to C++ Builder 10 Seattle that really make the developer experience a lot faster and a lot more stable. C++ Builder 10 Seattle is solid. All right, really quick before I turn the presentation back over to David I would just like to remind you to please check out the blog. I went really quick on some of these highlights. There's so much to dive into that we just didn't have the time in the introduction here. But please do check out the blog, and you can dive into all the great topics that I brought up and get all the details and learn why C++ Builder 10 Seattle is one of our biggest releases for C Builder yet.
Talking about C++ Builder 10 Seattle, this is now all about building not only VCL but FireMonkey applications for Windows 10 and for iOS, Android, OS 10. All of that is available. The team has put together a new updated compiler for Win32 that uses the C++ 11 language. We still have the existing classic compiler. Is that the right term, maybe?
Classic.
You can use the new Clang Enhanced compiler, and we'll talk a little more about what Clang Enhanced means in a minute, for using the same source code on 32 and 64-bit Windows and iOS and Android. And then the ID has been enhanced. It's a large memory model ID now, so if you've got very large C++ projects, you can load more of those in and do everything inside of the developer development environment. It's still a Win32 IDE, but it uses the full extent of the enhanced 4 gigabytes of user storage for projects and work that you're doing inside of the environment. So build and debug large projects, that's all great. Multi-monitor support, all of those features there. Maybe while we're in here, I don't know who wants to do this, one of the new capabilities is parallel compilation if you're using the Clang-based compilers.
Yeah, this work was done by Agus. He's not here, so I can speak a little bit about it. What it is Clang actually has two modes. One is known as the driver, and then one is called as CC1 is the term we use, or the actual compiler. So what we've done is, if you're compiling multiple sources, more than one, and you have many cores on your machine, the driver can actually launch multiple processes to compile the sources in parallel. I mean, at the same time, it speeds up compilation on projects where you have lots of source code. So,
okay, and again, that's if you're using the C++ compilers that are Clang enhanced for Win32, Win64, iOS, and Android, right?
Actually, this feature is only available on the 3.3 based compiler.
Okay.
And I know you have a slide that talks about that. So for now, it's only available on the, let's say, the Windows compiler for Win32 and Win64.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay. Again, if you have existing projects that are for Win32 that are using the classic compiler, those still work just fine.
Yeah, you can still use the classic compiler for old code, but we recommend that you use the Clang-based compiler for new code.
All right, so here I just wanted to mention this Clang Enhanced compiler. Again, it's C++11. We have a C++11 compliance status page for the different versions of the compilers that we ship, so we'll take a look at that in a little bit. It supports the usual things, the property method event model, right? The precompiled headers, runtime type information, reference counting for mobile applications, all of that is still there, right?
Yes. Yeah. And the bulk of what we do is also adding all the extensions to support Delphi runtime, which is not necessarily listed there. I mean, it's listed as property method and event, but there's a lot more that goes on behind the scene, like with closures and class methods and Delphi style classes and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So.
And we've covered that in past code rages and past sessions, the blog post. There's some language enhancements for Windows, for UUIDs, for Delphi, runtime type information, and so on. If you have questions at the end about some of that, because you want to refresh your memory, put those in the Q&A log, but we'll keep moving and focusing here. This is that slide I think you're referring to, which is in C++ Builder 10 Seattle. These are all the compilers that are available. Do any of you want to sort of go through each of these?
For the most part, what we want to do is be on a single version. So 3.3 is the base version that we're targeting, and the two Windows compilers are on 3.3. iOS, we stayed on 3.1. It was just a matter of time. We never had the time to move forward. And iOS 64, we were already on 3.3. And then Android, the same thing. We stayed on 3.1 for the Clang portion, but the LLVM portion was always on 3.3 because we needed some code generation that's present in the version of 3.3 of LLVM. And the classic compilers are as before. Those haven't changed much.
Okay, so those are still what we sort of characterized back then as the C++ 0x. They had a few of the C++.
Yeah, some of the early
C++ X features, but if you want the full set of C++11, then use those compilers up above.
Yeah,
and we'll see the ID in a moment, how you can set the different options and set the number of cores if you're doing parallel compilation and so on. I want to spend a few moments, and you can all chime in here, about this, how we build compilers, because we're in the compiler business, both for Delphi and for C++. You know, we don't just get some compilers from somewhere, we download them. We build and extend and enhance, and in the case of some of this, use the technologies, but add our own, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's Roger can probably talk a little bit about the back end on the LLVM side, because we do work on both sides. We do both on the compiler, the front end, and then we do work on the back end. And sometimes we do the work because the version that's available out there does not have the features that we need. And then later, the version that's available might implement those features. Like, for example, when we first released the 64-bit compiler on Windows, we had to do some work on the LLVM side for exception handling and PData, and Eli and Roger can probably touch on that. And then on the Clang side, we did a lot of additions for all the Delphi language extensions, but also for Windows extensions. You mentioned earlier UUID, the ability to tie a GUID to a class, to a type, to a struct. That was not available back then. Now, of course, that's part of core Clang, and it's not something we need to add. But even things like Windows extensions such as DLL import, DLL export, or select any, all of these, if they are not available at the time we're shipping, we will add them to the front end or back end, wherever it's appropriate.
There's more than just the compilers as part of the tool chain. There's the compilers themselves, of course. There's linkers, there's libraries, there's generation of code, there's debug symbols, all sorts of things that we talked about, right? And so this is just an example of some of the bits that are going on under the covers. iLink 32, iLink 64, that's our linker, is that right?
Yeah, those are our linker.
Okay. Xlink?
That's our linker. It's the OSX linker.
Okay, and then LD, I guess 32 and 64. I think is it the same linker for both 32 and 64-bit iOS?
Yes.
That's Apple's linker that we ported and are running on the Windows platform with some minor changes.
And then for Android, GNU LD?
Yeah, it's the link, the LD that is included with the NDK.
Oh, okay.
With Android.
And then this is just an example, and we'll go into the IDE. If you want to use the classic compiler versus the non-classic compiler or the Clang enhanced compiler for Win32, right? So
Yes.
The default, I think, is true still. If you say file new C++ VCL project, FireMonkey project, it's still set to use the classic compiler by default?
Yeah, that was we looked at this for quite a while, and we opted to stay with the classic compiler because the bulk of the code that we suspect that our users have would be targeting BCC32.
In my IDE, I have a favorites project group here with just two C++ 11 projects. So this first one I just call Lambda Demo. Let's go and open up its source code. It's got a single button in the user interface, and on the button click handler, I'm using an auto and setting this Lambda, this pointer, that's the capture variable that I'm using so that I can get to the label 1. So let's first go up here and set Win32, and I'll go and say project options, compiler, and here you'll see use classic Borland compiler. I've turned it off. If I turned it on and did a build, it would complain about this language syntax because we didn't have support for lambdas in the classic compiler, but I'll leave it off. So I'll just take this first simple project and I'll run it on Win32 and see that I can now use C++ 11 language capabilities on Win32. So it compiles and links, and there's a Win32 using a C++ lambda. I'll also go to my iOS device and we'll set its target, compile and run this example. 64-bit, there's the splash screen. Here's the example. I'll click on the button, lambda, 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 and it gets the code within a lambda expression put in the label's text property. We'll switch back to a second example in the IDE. This one is using the parallel programming library that's part of the system threading unit. And here I've got the task run method, and I've got a lambda embedded inside the task run method call, again capturing the this pointer so that I could output information to the form, and then I've got an embedded lambda as well to do a thread synchronize so that I could add to the memo lines that's in the user interface. I've got two buttons, one that starts the task and a second button that will just display the current value of the variable value. So we'll go and compile this second example for 32-bit Windows. So we'll start the background task and we'll show the value, and the lambda is working away, and I can look at the current value that's being updated in the task. It's finally done. Let's compile for 64-bit Windows, and again the background task, look at the values. It's doing a sleep and doing its work until finally the background task is done. Then finally, let's go and select iOS device 64-bit. So I'll go and compile and run this. There's the splash screen, and I can click on the background task button and start showing the value by tapping on the second button until the task is complete and everything's done. We're not going to go through the whole list of C++11 features. There's a DocWiki entry. I have the URL. I'll bring that up in a moment. I just picked a few. There's all these different lists, and I know everybody's got their favorite lists of what are the 10 most useful capabilities in the C++11 language. I think this was some of them. In the DocWiki, there's two different pages that will help you on C++11 if you want to see what's in the products. The first one is more of a documentation style page, feature supported. It goes through over here in the contents page some of the highlights of the C++11 language, static assertions and so on. So you can navigate around and you'll see some little examples, little text about them. It's not meant to be a textbook on C++11. The second page here is a page in the DocWiki, and I like this one because it gives you a nice visual reference by each of the compilers, as well as it's organized more by the ISO C++ standard committee list, and it includes the proposal documents for the different languages as off-page links going down to the Open Standard Working Group 21 document pages for all the different papers. So it's pretty cool if you see something on the list here that you're interested in a little more from a ISO standards view to look at that document and the depths and lengths that the committee goes through and members of the C++ language community to explain why this feature is the way that it is. And we can scroll down and see again, this is the BCC32 column, which is that 0x classic compiler versus BCC32. So you'll quickly see, and also OS 10 again, which is one of our classic compiler versions versus all of the Clang enhanced compilers with our extensions. So as we scroll down, let's see, alignment support. What is that? Oh, that's in ARM64. Okay. It's the first one I noticed that was there. Inheriting constructors. There's still a few things down, for example, in the concurrency part that are still being worked on or on different versions. If you also want to see what the Clang open source project community itself, there's a Clang status on the Clang LLVM page for the latest releases that we're working towards in our development effort. But this is how we're mapping the current release versions of our compilers. So again, you should feel pretty comfortable if you're using all of the Clang enhanced, our own built versions of our compilers that have C++11 support, that you have most of the C++11 language. At the same time, I know that there's work going on as this code rage is happening. There's the next version of the ISO C++ committee meeting on the big island of Hawaii in Kailua Kona, really working on the next generation, the C++ 17 version of the language, and all sorts of proposals, concepts, light, and other things that we'll see. And again, our team, we're a member of the ISO C++ committee. We have members that go to the meetings. Everybody's contributing. You're also doing all the work here, you guys. Dawn's not with us right now because she's over at the meeting, making sure that we can stay on the forefront of the C++ worldwide standard ISO C++ language and implementing that in our compilers. Libraries are also involved in the world, but this is just some of the list of standard C++ libraries and some of the boost information, because we're always asked by C++ developers. Libraries are very important both for language standard and for where the language is going. I know the boost community, for example, has pushed ahead a lot of the things that are going on, and some of those, like Lambda functions, for example, they get swept into the language standard because of the work going on, right, Lee?
A number of them that have come pretty much directly from Boost.
What we do is there's different versions of the standard library. We use Dinkumware, right? We're a licensee and we ship versions of Dinkumware with our compilers?
Correct. They're also used by Microsoft. That's their implementation also.
Okay. And then I always got confused about this, about what about iOS and what about Android? What do we do for standard libraries there?
We actually use what they supplied for their native solutions.
So for iOS, there's a standard library, C++ library that's part of the iOS SDK that we can use and link into our applications for iOS?
Correct, yeah.
And then for the Android SDK NDK, there's also a standard C++ library. I know Google has been trying to do more with C++, right?
Right. The different libraries have different levels of implementation so far. So there will be some slight differences when you're talking about C++ when you're using our product between them. So you'll have to be a little bit aware. But But they're all moving forward. So, and every release they get closer and closer.
And I also know, I think, and this goes back to some of the Clang LLVM work, there's a whole bunch of companies involved in the world of C++ compilers across all these multiple devices, right? Google's involved, Apple's involved, we're involved. The meetings usually take place. I don't know who goes. Maybe different people go. They're here in the Silicon Valley. I don't know if they're always at Apple headquarters or elsewhere.
Not anymore. They tend to be. I mean, they are in San Jose. They were in San Francisco a couple of years ago. But I usually would, or Don would attend. I mean, we've all been to the LLVM conferences at some point or another. So
it's it's a great thing to see all this great stuff is being done to help C++ developers everywhere across all these different platforms, and we get the benefits in our compilers and our libraries of all of this work.
Yeah, and it at the conference you really get a feel that it extends way beyond C++. Every language is represented is using some portion of maybe just LLVM or some of the tools. So, but yeah, C++ is very, very well positioned there, but it extends beyond C++. So.
Now, one of the things we did, I think it was different this time, is we have the Get It package manager is part of the IDE, and so we have Boost. Used to be this part of the install. I remember because I used to install Boost, and you just go away for a while and have a coffee because it's a lot of libraries, a lot of source code to be unzipped and put. You could I guess skip it, but if you want it all, then you would see it being installed on your machine. And so what we did this time, and I'll switch to the IDE. So in the past, Boost has been part of the regular install, and now instead Boost is separated out so you can choose to install it using the Get It package manager. So you get that by going to the Tools menu. So you bring up the Get It package manager, and you can filter, for example, you could say, show me Boost. You can go and say, show me all the free or all, or show me just libraries and so on. And then here's that Boost 139155 that's for 10 Seattle. And you can click install. I won't do it now because it'll sit there for a little while. But you can choose to install components that are out there in the Get It package manager, including Boost. So that's how you can go and get Boost if you have projects that need the Boost libraries installed on your machine. And then there's documentation on the DocWiki about how to do things with Boost. Again, the other thing is that if you're doing Boost for Windows, the classic compiler, then it'll use the 139 that's installed. And if you're using Clang enhanced Win32, Win64 compilers, the BCC 32C and the BCC 64, it'll use the version 1.55 that's installed and out there, and the environment variables are set accordingly and properly so that it finds the right libraries for you. For mobile development on iOS and Android, we need to do automatic reference counting. This is what happens in the mobile world and in these devices that have even less memory, and you want to be very cognizant of what your application is doing. Delphi has this as well for its objects that you use, and so Arc is there and it's built in with the compilers and the runtime when you're building applications for FireMonkey multi-device applications using T-object based things and so on. Anything else to add, Bruno, or anyone about Arc here?
No, other than there's really good documentation to show how to use it, and I typically recommend don't rely on Arc to do your cleanup. Do the cleanup because we will do the right thing. I mean, like for example, use a smart pointer, unique pointer, or shed pointer, or whatever auto pointer. Or if you need, call delete, and we will do the right thing. We'll actually decrement the ref count, and if the ref count goes down to 0, the object will be cleaned. I prefer that users don't write code that just says, oh, this is Arc enabled, so it will get cleaned up by default, because then that code is no longer portable. You can't build that code on desktop.
And so delete is great. I mean,
yeah.
Call delete.
Yeah. There's a good page somewhere that explains all this. So new your objects and delete them. I mean, just be a good citizen, and Arc will do the right thing.
So here we have C++ project group for an Android Intense example. Got a sender and a receiver. So Darren, why don't you tell us a little about these applications?
The Android Intent system, you can kind of think of it as being similar to shell execute on Windows. It's what does inter-process communication. Whenever an application launches, it launches with a particular intent. By default, the standard intent is a launch intent, which just basically starts the front page of the application. That's what the default Android process loader does. An application can be launched with a different intent and take you to a different part of an application, for example. That's how, like when you click on a web link, it can open up an application. That's what the intent system does. So this is a sample that shows how to send and receive an intent with a FireMonkey application. Sending an intent is something that has been possible for a long time, and receiving an intent is something that we've been able to do via a push notification in the past. When you receive a push notification, you can tap on the notification and launch a FireMonkey application with that whatever intent has been defined in the notification. What we've done in Rad Studio 10 Seattle is we have made it possible so that it doesn't have to be through a push notification. It can be through any arbitrary intent. You can send an intent from another FireMonkey application or from an application of some other type. You can launch a FireMonkey application with that intent. This application is the sender. So it has a couple buttons that sends different pieces of text. One is just a little trivial C++ hello world function. The other is a little skeleton of what a Unit 1 header file would look like in C++ Builder. The method that does all the work is this send text via intent. And here it just receives a string, and then it calls the Android API to first create an intent and then set some parameters on it. One of the critical things it sets is the type of the intent. Here I'm using a text type, and I made up this type because it's likely something that doesn't exist already on an Android phone. It's just text/CPP. You have to set the action for the intent, which is, in this case, it's to view the content of what's being sent, and then it sets the extra text parameter to be the text that we want to send. Then the next thing it does is it calls the Android package manager to see if there is something on the device that is registered to be able to handle this type of content. So the type of the content here is text/CPP. So it calls the package manager and it asks, do you have anything that can handle this intent? If it does, it will return one, and then we launch the activity with this intent. If the package manager says it doesn't have anything to handle this, then it will fail that test, and we can show an error message.
And then over on the receiver side, we have some code, right, in the form create?
Yeah, what the form create is doing is it's seeing if there's an application event service, and if there is, it's setting up an event handler to handle the startup so that when the application starts up, it can look to see what intent it was started with. If a particular intent was provided, it can handle that intent action. In this case, the intent action that we're looking for is an intent that contains text to be displayed. When the application is launched, if it's launched with an intent, it will get into this method, and we will validate that the intent has data, and then extract the data, and if we got extra text in that intent, then we just display it in a memo.
And so to test these, we just need to make sure that the receiver is on our device, and then we'll do that by running, right? Because I haven't deployed it over there before.
Right, yeah. You just need to make sure that the receiver is on the device. There is something that you have to add to the Android manifest as well. You need to, in the manifest, you have to indicate that the application can handle a particular intent type.
Okay.
And after we show this running, I can have you bring up the Android manifest and show you what that is.
Okay, so over here I'm running the receiver, and then when it's done loading, it just says, okay, it's there now. So if we look at the Android manifest.
Yeah, and if you look down towards the bottom, you see there's a section that's labeled intent filter.
Yep.
That section already exists, and the first two items, the main action and the category of launcher, those already exist. That's the default intent for launching an application. The last section here indicates when this application is installed on the device, it tells the Android package manager that this application can handle an intent of the type action. It's browsable. It can become the default for this type of file type. And then it sets the MIME type. Here, this is the same that was set in the source code, text/CPP.
So now we have the sender popping up, and there's the splash screen.
So then just hit one of the buttons. And so this is now trying to launch an application. In your case, you have an application that is probably already registered to handle any MIME type of text. You can choose to open this with the FireMonkey CPP receive intent, and you can tell it either just once or default. And that is the text that was received from via the intent from the sender application.
So just to summarize, C++ 11 on Win32, Win64, iOS 32/64, and Android. Full large memory model IDE for project power and productivity and scalability. Fastest way to build, your data-rich applications on Windows 10, Mac mobile, work with the Internet of Things, devices, sensors, and so on and more. C++ Builder, VCL, and FireMonkey development. And for new C++ mobile and desktop developers coming from other languages and tool sets, you have a C++ 11 development environment for Windows and iOS and Android. And now it's time for your questions. Okay, David, and Brian here.
Hello.
Want to welcome everybody yet again to the C++ track here at Code Rage 10. A few questions have come in, and again, you can use the question area to get your questions asked.
David, really quick,
Yeah.
I'd like to just give a quick information to everybody. We just posted an official blog for the entire Code Rage, both C++ and Object Pascal tracks. So you can find the most current schedule information as well as all the supplemental information for any long URLs and that kind of thing. For every presentation, the blog post will be updated as we go. Right now, there really isn't any information there at this time, but we will be adding to it as we go. And that URL is embt.co/crx-blog. And we will also be adding that link to the Code Rage homepage at embarcadero.com/Code Rage. Okay, thank you very much, and I will turn it back to you, David.
Okay, I'm going to put that in the chat window, the long form URL. And put that in the chat window as well. So there's the short form URL. Okay, let's see. So there's a question about, have we done anything to improve the migration of apps from previous versions of C++ Builder? This is usually hard work. You should be able to migrate your projects forward. But if you have any issues, or if you can post on our quality portal, quality.embarcadero.com, create an issue and list some of the things that you were having trouble with as it relates to migrating your apps from previous versions of C++ Builder and what those versions are, because I just open the projects and it updates them. But if you have some really old projects, I need to do a little more research about where you're coming from. But you should be able to just open the project. Now, if you're using components that you don't have versions for yet on the latest release you're trying to move to, then you need to go to those sources, whether they're tech partners or whatever, to get the things that you need for your libraries and components and so on that are updated. But if you're having specific issues with specific areas, put those in the quality portal. Say, here are my C++ project migration challenges, and I'll bring those to the team, and they'll take a look at it through quality.embarcadero.com, the quality portal. Ludo's asking, will iLink 64 be updated for large projects? The team has on their work list. They're definitely looking at the linker and capacity. The IDE is now a large memory model, as we mentioned. It's still a 32-bit Windows app, but it supports 4 gigabytes of memory for large projects. The linker still, when you have very, very large projects and you have debug information turned on for all of them, that's something that the team is still working on for the future. Alex asks, I wonder which language did you guys use to build the C and C++ 11 compilers? It's a combination of C and C++. So depending on the different parts of the tool chain. Okay, let's see. What are the steps needed to migrate a C++ code from classic compiler to Clang? Just turn off the classic compiler and compile. There's that classic compiler option I showed. Turn it off on your Win32 projects and recompile. And again, we use the Clang Enhanced compiler for Win32, Win64, iOS, and Android. If you're doing OS 10, that is still our old classic compiler for now. Team's looking at what we need to do and time to move the OS 10 compiler forward. But otherwise, just turn off the classic compiler and recompile. Now, if you're taking advantage of some old arcane classic compiler-ism of some kind, maybe a define like what you should do is come to the C++ 11 team session, which is at 12 noon Pacific time today, because there are some if-defs. One in particular, if you might have some source code that's using the compiler or runtime library version number, the Clang Enhanced compilers only take integers. They don't take floating point values. So, if, for example, you have some if-def code on where the compiler and runtime version is 17.0 or 21.0, and you're using that if-def, we have an update. You can find that in the doc wiki. Look for the RTL version C, I think is the name of the define, but that we cover that in the C++ 11 R&D team session today at noon. Okay, let's see. I don't have a timeline, Jaden, for C++ 11 for OS 10, but it is something being looked at. Okay, typing and talking. Okay, thanks for hosting. Well, we love doing Code Rage. We love spending these 3 days each year, as well as all our webinars and skill sprints, spending time with you. Let's see. Okay, so there's a thing here about Android background execution has been covered in detail in blog posts, a little discussed about iOS. With iOS, there's a version info project option setting, so use project options, go to version info, and there's a background, iOS background, true or false. If you want your iOS apps to be background, just go and check that box to be background enabled, and we'll compile and generate the right things. So it's in project options, version info. Look for the iOS when you have an iOS target platform selected. Flag. Okay. Let's see. How are we doing? Okay. Okay, and if there's something, let's see, there was a quality portal entry as it relates to gestures and tab controls. I will escalate. I will take a look at the quality portal. Entry. You can always send me an email, david.i@embarcadero.com, with the QP issue number. Okay, let's see. Okay, what happened to Windows Phone support? It's something we're looking at. But we have samples now where what we do, and we've tested. I think Jim is going to put up a video. I think I have one somewhere. I'll try to find it. What we do is we take an APK and we just run it on a Windows Phone 10. So for now, APK runs on a Windows 10 phone. If you have the Astoria beta. And Astoria is the Windows 10 phone technology from Microsoft that lets you run Android APKs, but there's much more that we're working on for the future. Let's see. Okay, and then there was, let's see, the C++ Builder 10 Seattle seems to have enhanced editing features compared to previous versions. In the doc wiki, there's information about the IDE features that have been enhanced. It's the Castalia technology that we acquired that's been integrated into the IDE experience completely. In previous version, it was its own separate menu as a plugin, but now it's integrated, and we'll do some videos, but it's talked about in the doc wiki on the editing experience and what's new. Let's see. Will component libraries be specific for classic or Clang? Yeah, they're different compilers. So when we have different compilers, have different component libraries. So we build those for you for our components, and then our third-party technology partners can build theirs as well, supporting the BCC 32 and the BCC 32C compiler. We don't have support for the simulator. We're still looking at that, not currently. I don't have a time frame if that's going to be the follow-up question right now. Let's see. There's a couple questions or comments here about the compilers and integration with Delphi. Bruno Babet and Code Rage 9 did a session. If you haven't seen it, you can go back to Code Rage 9, and it was a whole session about using C++ with the Delphi RTL and RTTI and so on. And it's a great session to watch. And the only thing that we don't really support right now are Delphi RTTI and attributes. But otherwise, you can get at, and we leverage the Delphi runtime and the Delphi RTTI. We have extensions to the C++ language for getting at the Delphi interfaces, getting at the Delphi RTTI, getting at the Windows APIs and special Windows-isms like UID generation and so on. You can check all of that out. There's a whole section in the doc wiki about working with the Delphi interfaces. So, but come to the 12 noon Delphi team. Let me bring up the schedule as we're getting towards the top of the hour, and I want to talk about a couple other things. So today, some sessions you'll want to definitely attend. One is the What's New in FireMonkey. That's at 8 a.m. Pacific time with Darren Kaczynski, who's one of the architects of FireMonkey and on the FireMonkey team. So we'll be talking about all sorts of new FireMonkey things and cross multi-device development. Also want to make sure that join us for, I'm going to defer some of these questions as well and repeat them. At the 12 noon hour, that's the C++ 11 development for Windows, iOS, and Android with the C++ team. They'll be here. They'll be walking over from just across the way inside of our building here in Scotts Valley, and a couple of them who work virtually will be online with us. And then at 1 p.m., Brian and Jeff are going to talk about and show you the new RAD solution pack, which works for C++ Builder, both for VCL and for FireMonkey. And so you want to make sure to join us then, plus, of course, all of the other sessions that are happening throughout the days.